Yeah, I'm not bad, thank you. Yeah,
Good, good. Yeah, can you hear me okay?
yeah, great.
Fantastic, fantastic. How's your day been?
Yeah, not too bad. Bit busy. Uh, yeah, just all the restrictions from COVID and stuff just makes everything a bit more of a slog to try and get things done in your allotted time. But yeah, it's good. It's good
No,
to
no.
be back and working anyway, definitely.
Yeah, it must be good. I mean, we'll dive a bit deeper into the restrictions later on, but we're still kind of all adapting to this kind of new way of living and then run up to Christmas as well. But yeah, we'll get kick started. So just to kind of give a brief introduction for everyone who will be listening, could you kind of give us a brief introduction of like who you are and what do you do?
Yeah. Yeah, so for those that haven't read anything, I'm Dr. Jake Mills. I'm a research fellow at the University of Leeds, and I specialise in molecular virology. So this basically means I look at the structure and assembly of viruses, and then we want to use that to utilise vaccine development. Um, so although I'm not a coronavirus specialist, I have knowledge in the field of vaccine development. And I obviously feel like I have enough knowledge to help get any points across that we need about why a COVID vaccine is important. I think I've also got a unique viewpoint as I volunteered in the Lighthouse Labs during the start of the pandemic, and I've also worked for Public Health England at the Vaccine Evaluation Unit. So this basically uses molecular tools as a surveillance technique to see the effectiveness of vaccines over time and see how they work and how effective they can be in stopping disease. Yeah.
Could you explain a little bit about the lighthouse work that you did there? Because I'm not sure a lot of listeners will know what that is.
Yeah, so the Lighthouse Labs were the labs that were set up around March and April time by the government from the start of the pandemic, and they've solely they were created from scratch. So I think there was three Lighthouse Labs that were made at the start. The main one was in Milton Keynes. There was one in Glasgow, and there was also one in Alderley Park in Cheshire, and that was the one that I worked in. We basically they asked everyone that was available and had skills to come in and help set up this lab. So people, everyone from PIs, so professors to PhD students, and even undergraduates were brought in to help set up these testing labs. And as most people may know now, we've increased our testing capacity in this country now by hundreds and hundreds of thousands of tests per day. And basically, I got in at the ground floor and was helping establish that. Yeah.
That's, Thank you for the great work that you're doing there. It sounds like obviously a lot of hard work has been done by a lot of people to organise that and to make it work. Obviously, we all know about how the testing was a pretty difficult thing to start with in the UK, and it seems like we're kind of up to speed now where we're able to kind of test everyone. What inspired you to, obviously, you've been in this sector for a while. What inspired you to kind of get into this aspect of microbiology?
Yeah, I was trying to think about this because I thought this question might come up. Like, why am I so interested in viruses? I think it started off first of just always being interested in disease. So from a young age, my mother had quite a serious illness. So I think that um, meant that I was always wondering what and why disease was from an early time point. And then I think obviously pandemics are at the front of people's minds now, but to me, even as growing up, there was always a newsworthy item, whether that be, foot and mouth disease, pandemic. I vividly remember, having to clean your feet and hands every time you entered a zoo or a farm. Then the bird flu pandemic, then more coronavirus pandemics such as SARS and MERS in Asia. I think it's just something that was always, at the forefront of the news, and I just was always fascinated about how these new viruses can occur and spread to humans and cause disease. So I decided what better way to learn about it than to study this in more detail as my job.
Wow, it's very interesting because it's not at the forefront of many young people's mind as well. And I guess maybe part of that as well might be because in the Western world we've not really experienced as many pandemics as much in the recent years. Just you mentioned foot and mouth earlier on, but and that's kind of been one of the reasons why we've been so far behind in the aspect of reacting to this pandemic. Is the fact that you look at the key countries that were ahead of the game, the likes of South Korea, Taiwan. Uh, they all experienced SARS early on, so they knew how to react. Um, One little additional question is why Leeds as well? I'm from Leeds myself, and it's a great city. I know the university is great, but yeah, what would you want to pursue your PhD there?
Yeah, so Leeds is a great city. As you say, I'm from Manchester originally, so felt a bit of a sin to cross the Pennines and come into Yorkshire. But yeah, it's a great city and university. So I did my PhD at Sheffield, and split between University of Sheffield and University of Oxford. And then I knew I wanted to do my postdoctoral research in um, virology, and University of Leeds has one of the biggest virology departments in the UK. It's rivaled only by Glasgow and maybe Oxford and Cambridge. So yeah, I love the north of England, and why not come to a great university and city at the same time?
Fantastic. It's great to hear. It's quite surprising to hear that Leeds has one of the leading virology research departments. I'm guessing Leeds has been on the kind of the forefront of finding the research to tackle the coronavirus.
Yeah, so definitely in regards to the testing centre, Professor Nick Stonehouse and Professor Mark Harris from University of Leeds were one of the first people to basically liaise with the Lighthouse Labs and offer their services. So that's resulted in me and a number of other postdocs, PhD students, and staff to go over there and help, yeah, the Lighthouse Labs. And some people, even though myself and a number of my colleagues have returned back now to Leeds to do research, a lot of people from the university are still there in the testing centres, helping to continue develop assays and set up more labs. So they've been a great help. And then yeah, there's coronavirus. Although obviously Oxford and Imperial are the main labs that are and the main universities that are helping to develop the vaccines that are available for use. There's definitely labs in Leeds that are investigating how SARS-CoV-2, which causes COVID-19, works and how we can help combat that or any other future coronavirus that may have this effect in the future.
Yeah. So we've all kind of seen the video of Bill Gates now in the TED Talk 5 years ago. And you highlighted earlier about obviously you had an interesting about learning how these diseases came about. Obviously, before COVID came along, did you and other people in your field kind of have a essentially kind of expectation that we're due a pandemic in the near future, in the next couple of decades?
Yeah, so I think the general answer is yes. Virologists would always think that an epidemic would definitely happen anyway. So an epidemic is a viral outbreak that occurs in a certain area. Maybe some people did predict a global pandemic, but I would be very surprised if people predicted something that would occur on this scale. They infect, a very, very large uh, amount of the global population. Epidemics are something that happen very, very frequently. And as you said earlier, maybe we're just not in tune with this because it usually occurs not in the UK. There was the Ebola pandemic not too long ago in Africa. And again, a lot of Britain's virologists went over to Africa to help with this. But luckily, that virus was contained in a certain area. So yeah, the short answer is yes, we would expect an epidemic would happen, but nothing I didn't expect anyway that it would happen on this scale for sure.
Yeah, I guess one thing that's I remember reading this a while ago is because of the kind of delayed reaction of coronavirus and the mild symptoms that it can present at first. When you compare it something to like Ebola, which has a lot worse symptoms in the early starters, Ebola is a lot harder to spread around the world because it's easier to contain, it's easier to identify, and sadly, it kills a lot of people before they have the chance to essentially go and travel anywhere else. And that's what next coronavirus, successful is the correct word, but successful as if a pandemic's doing its job and a virus is doing its job, it gets it to spread so quickly. Because what I read when I was seeing this is the way that the UK government prepared for the next big epidemic. They expected it to be some type of influenza, similar type of epidemic, and obviously it's more of a respiratory syndrome, what coronavirus is, which put us at a big. Well, the question I'm asking, how much has that set us back? We've essentially been planning for the wrong thing coming up compared to.
Yeah, I mean, so influenza is a respiratory disease. It's slightly different to a respiratory virus. It's slightly different to coronavirus. I think basically the government, even though they was told, even if you disregard all of these things, they knew that the coronavirus was going to reach these shores at some point. You know, there was the coronavirus emerged around November last year from China, Wuhan specifically, and it was spread into more and more countries. And yet, we seemed to just think, oh, it would never reach these, it would never reach this country, and we didn't plan ahead. And I think that's really the issue here, is that we were so far behind the curve that when the coronavirus hit, and it hit hard, we was trying to play catch up, and I think we're still trying to play catch up now, to be honest. Whereas if we was proactive and we started to, implement testing centres, or even just, take it seriously, we all know the famous interview where Boris said he was shaking hands with people in the coronavirus hospital, coronavirus patients in a hospital. That just kind of signifies the government response to the virus, and at the start anyway. And so I think that the way we approached it from the start was disastrous, really.
I fully support the way that you've summarised it there. It was disastrous, and it was kind of more of a comedic view that they took towards it. I remember Jacob Rees-Mogg coming out and saying, just all you need to do is wash your hands for 30 seconds, sing happy birthday while you do it, and everything will be fine. I remember I nearly got, I was flying away to Prague, nearly got stuck over there. And what was the interesting thing that I found is they literally just went into lockdown as I got there. And essentially they were a week or two ahead of the UK. So going over there, and it's not the best way to spend a weekend away or a holiday, but it was almost like this ghost town. And obviously none of us have ever experienced this type of lockdown before. And I was seeing it with my own eyes. And I was like, oh, wow, this is crazy. And then I come back and, I mean, there's no fruit and veg on the shelves, there's no toilet paper. And I was like, oh, there's a lot more worse to come. And everyone around me was like, what's going on? And yeah, it was, we think back now and it seems like so long ago, but I remember that weekend as well. I think it clashed with St. Paddy's weekend. And we saw people going out and drinking and all close together. Songs about saying it's just the flu, and it's amazing what hindsight can do. But it's the government. It's been a constant just failure after failure of what they've been doing. And one thing that I think it's a bit. I feel like please disagree. I feel like the way that Britain has treated and managed the coronavirus, I feel like it's tarnished our great scientific reputation amongst the world. Would you agree with that?
No, I do disagree with that, to be honest, but not So I think there's a distinction we can make here. So basically, the scientific reputation, I think, has been enhanced in my eyes if you look at it from a research type of view. So Oxford, Imperial, AstraZeneca, etc., we are leading the way in vaccine production. You know, it looks like we're going to have two vaccines that I think will be of high quality and be extremely useful that have been made in under a year, which is, before this would happen, is unthinkable, really. So I think, yeah, in that way, we have really enhanced or at least kept our strong scientific reputation. Um, I like to think I'm impartial, but yeah, especially when I went in science, you have to be impartial. But yeah, the missteps taken in response to the pandemic, I think, have been governmental missteps rather than scientific. They say that they've listened to the science, but I think if you look at it, they've actively gone against the recommendations. You know, they were late to mandate face masks, even though there was reports coming out that they would be useful. And I think even if they wasn't useful, you know, it's better to wear them than not wear them, I think, is any, even though now we do have evidence that they do stop transmission. You know, we locked down too late again for the second wave. You could say the first wave we were locked down too late. We definitely locked down too late the second wave, despite protestations from SAGE, the government science advisory board. And I think even now, you know, scientists are warning against these new Christmas guidelines that are coming into play. And although it's tough, um, you know, to say you can't see people at Christmas, that would be the best thing if you want to save lives. But the government have decided to allow us to mix at Christmas, which is another point completely. But yeah, I think the main missteps taken basically during this pandemic are governmental rather than yeah, scientific.
Would you say this tier system is supporting based off scientific recommendations?
Yeah, so I mean, I don't obviously know the scientific reasoning exactly why they go and make these decisions. Obviously, it's easy for me to say, as a scientist, you should do this and you should not do this. Whereas the scientific advisors to the government have to work with the government, and you know they can't just say we need to lock down until the virus goes, because that's not feasible for the economy of this country. And you know we live in a capitalist state, so society. So you know it's we have to juggle the economy and lives. You know, we can't just you can't just choose one over the other, unfortunately. Um, and there are obviously scientific advice that's gone on to make these tiers. You know, we look at the R squared rate of the virus. The R value is used to look at the way the virus is spreading through the community. So our R value above 1 means that the virus infection rate is increasing, and below that means it's either leveling off or dropping. And we use that to say what tier the people are in. But as we know, you know, our testing um, isn't ideal. We don't have full community-wide testing, so these numbers can never be 100% accurate. And regardless of that, I think the tier system has failed, as you can see by the fact that we had to go into a second lockdown, despite having this tier system for a number of months. And yeah, I don't know what the answer is, but I think there is definitely a better strategy that could be implemented that could help stop the spread of the virus for sure.
Yeah, it's kind of it's you can kind of tell that this was not their initial strategy, the government strategy they wanted to take. The aspect of how they delayed it, the first lockdown. I remember roundabout just before the first lockdown, that they wanted to talk about the herd immunity, similar approach to what Sweden took. But at the end of the day, the NHS just didn't have enough ICU beds to essentially to accommodate this, which the Tory government have been depleting the NHS for decades, kind of trying to avoid that aspect of it. But would you, obviously, how would have do you reckon a herd immunity would have worked if we took a herd immunity? And we had the support network for that? Do you reckon we'd be in a better place right now, or do you think we'd be in a worse place?
Yeah, it's a very good question. So, I mean, I'm glad that you have remembered that the government suggested herd immunity at the start, because I think they're hoping that everyone forgets that point, and that it never gets brought up again. So yeah, regardless of taking our political feelings and ideas out of this, regardless if we had the best healthcare in the world, um, and there was enough beds for everyone, herd immunity as a strategy is utterly ridiculous in this sense. So herd immunity is a term that's used in relation to vaccination. So herd immunity means that you have a certain percentage of the population vaccinated to a disease, so therefore it is unable to spread throughout the population, even to those that are unvaccinated, because there's just not enough people to keep this virus to allow the virus to spread. I've never heard before. See, I'm relatively young. As I say, as a scientist, I've graduated from university for around 8 years now, and I've never heard herd immunity used as a term that's not applied to vaccination. So, I mean, I could be not as knowledgeable, but herd immunity, I've always known it's to do with vaccination. The idea suggesting that herd immunity could be achieved by allowing the virus to roam free and infect a large amount of the population is, it's almost criminal in my opinion. It doesn't work with viruses that we know about. Obviously that's to do with some virus, the makeup of certain viruses, but for example, the flu, we don't just let roam through the population and infect every people. We have a vaccine for the flu. We don't let polio spread throughout the population. We have a vaccine for polio. So, and this virus was unknown. We had no idea what the effects would be. We have no idea about what the long-term effects of the virus is. So, as it was suggested, everyone that I spoke to was up in arms about it, that it was even suggested, and I think the government realised that extremely quickly, because they changed tact almost instantly and kind of brushed it under the carpet. That was a bad idea when it was suggested, and it looks even worse now as the effects of long-term COVID become clear. So we're now it's not just a flu, it's not just a common cold, quotes and quotes. Even if you're a young person, you can be affected with it. Even if it doesn't lead to death, you can have very strong symptoms to the virus. And also, it's important to say that we've seen in studies, although this is changing all the time, it seems that antibodies upon natural infection of the virus don't stay for that long, up to maybe 6 months maximum, and then drops off. So therefore, it would have never have worked even if we let everyone be infected with COVID. This would be a yearly thing where we would keep becoming reinfected and infected with COVID over time. So yeah, it was a terrible, terrible decision to try that at the start.
I kind of want to expand on one of your points there, is like the fact that antibodies essentially are there for around 6 months, as a lot of researchers found. Why does that happen then?
I think I think the question at the moment is that we don't know, really, to be honest. There's a number of issues why that could be. There's work that's come out that's shown that, so SARS-CoV-2 is the coronavirus that causes COVID-19, but there are many other coronaviruses that roam freely throughout our population and infect us, and they can just cause mild symptoms. And with these seasonal coronaviruses, you can become reinfected with those over time, again and again. So it seems to follow the same pattern as these other coronaviruses. We're not. So it's true that you can be reinfected. It's a common misconception that I've seen on social media that once you've and obviously Donald Trump peddled this as well, that once you've become infected, you're immune, which is not true. Could just be the way it's basically the way the body responds to the coronavirus. So obviously the immune response is not being stimulated strong enough to create long-term antibodies. Whether this is because there's subtle variation in certain clusters of the virus. So there's a lot of different serotypes of other viruses, which changes the way the body reacts and the way you can be infected. This may happen with COVID-19 as well. We've seen potentially in Denmark a new strain that can affect mink. So it's shown that the coronavirus can slightly change and adapt. That could be it. And the data is very new, so there's been no long-term studies yet. So it maybe you do get long-term antibodies, but we've just not been able to pick that out yet. But yeah, there's still a lot to learn and a lot of data coming out that needs to be analysed quickly and efficiently.
Yeah, it seems like we're doing a great job to analyse that data and do the research. One thing I'd actually just kind of like to expand upon in the aspect of herd immunity. Obviously, Sweden have gone down that route from the research, the whole idea of it. It's the first I've ever heard the fact that herd immunity is only used with vaccines. And I think there was some type of flu or pandemic in the America in the mid 1800s. The idea of using herd immunity is, yes, you do accept that more people will die overall. So if we can kind of remove this moral bias away from this for a second, more people will die overall, but they will die. The whole length of the infection and the way it impacts the world will be a shorter period of time. Is that true if it's not applied with a vaccine, or is this, if it's herd immunity, it'll just continue to grow and grow?
Yeah, I mean, again, it's extremely tough, and I'm glad I'm not making these decisions, but I think the Swedish approach has been disastrous if you look at it really. Again, so they have 3 times the mortality rate, I think, of their nearest neighbours, such as Denmark and Norway. So straight away, they've failed their people really in that way. There, they haven't implemented a lockdown throughout this, and I'm not an economist, but its economy is still shrank. I think around 10%, as loads of other countries have shrank. But their economy has shrank more than some countries that have implemented lockdowns and dealt with the virus much better. It's not fared as bad as some countries, such as the UK, economy-wise. So therefore, you can, it's up to moralists and politicians to decide what that trade-off is. But yeah, I think a recent study has come out that has shown that maybe only 15% of those previously infected in Sweden have got protective antibodies to coronavirus. So there's no way that herd immunity can be achieved in a short amount of time anyway. And if they tried to do that, it would be years and years in the future when now we'd have a vaccine. We'd have a vaccine by then. So yeah, I think their policy has failed, probably as bad as ours, but just in a different way, really. They've tried a different tact, but yeah, I don't think it's worked out.
Yeah. Do you see them being able to maybe go back to normal a bit sooner than us? And that, if you're looking at essentially getting back your country back to normal and the way to normal site it works using herd immunity, you see that working as a tool for them?
No, because I think not really, because I still think they will have to. They're going to need the vaccine, and the same issues will arise with them for the vaccine distribution, procurement, use, surveillance. Now, these issues that we have with implementing a vaccine in a country, they're going to have the same issues as us and other countries that have implemented a lockdown. I don't think they will be in much better stead, to be honest.
So I guess this is the thing as well, which I think a lot of people don't take into account for is the fact that Britain Britain at an ultimate disadvantage anyways in the aspect of its population density and in compared to its relative size. Normally, you'd have thought us being an island would been able to kind of protect us a little bit, but the fact that we've not had any travel bans is ridiculous in itself. So if you add that on top of the fact that we're a very densely populated country, surely we was always going to essentially have a high amount of infection rates.
Yeah, you make a good point about the population density, and yeah, for sure that will have some effect, but I don't think it's by any large way the main determining factor of why we've suffered so badly from this. I think if you look at the data, there's countries with a similar population density to us that have done much better in regards to cases and deaths. So if you're looking in Europe, Belgium have got, I think, a higher population density than us, although less people overall, and their cases don't seem to be anywhere near as bad as us. And Vietnam have a much higher population density than us, and they've had, I think, under 100 deaths from the virus. So I think that would definitely have an effect, and it definitely exacerbate any effects that we've seen. But the way we've just dealt with the virus and the pandemic is, there's much other factors that have played into this. And one, as you say, no travel bans or even testing people as they enter the country. I when I was working at the testing centres, we stayed at the hotel near Manchester Airport, and despite the lockdown and no one being able to do anything, the amount of planes that I still saw enter the country every single day, and people getting off it and then could just wander freely into the country was just mind blowing, really. Yeah, and I don't think that was addressed until this summer, basically, which shows what issues we've had for sure.
Yeah, I remember when I was coming back from Prague and we came back and I think it was one of the quickest times I've walked through an airport to get off a plane. We was expecting to be tested, some precautions, even to have, the staff at the airport wear some form of PPE. Yes, this was in March, but still, there was nothing like that. And it kind of backs up what we were talking about earlier of how unprepared we was. That's one thing that I wouldn't mind to kind of highlight is from obviously we spoke this about how you've worked in the testing centres. Do you feel comfortable at the standards that the test centres are at now? Was at the start, was you a bit uncomfortable?
Yeah, I mean, I think they're definitely a lot better than they've been, for sure. I think they're now at a very high standard, but we can still improve for sure. We're a year into the pandemic, and I think it's took us until now to become competent, really, and to be able to use the testing centres as an effective tool. I think the main issue, and people will disagree with me with this, I've spoken to people about this before, but I'm still yet to fully understand as to why instantly the contracts for testing were farmed out to private companies such as Deloitte and Serco for testing and trace, for track and trace, for organisations such as Public Health England were bypassed. It's argued that PHE didn't have the capacity, to create these large testing centres. But I've worked in Public Health England labs before, and I feel like they was no different to the labs that I worked in the testing centres, really. And at least, even if they wanted to move to independent labs, there's no reason why these Public Health England and other labs, even university labs, could have been used initially from the start, and then we could have transferred over into these new labs once they were made. We lost vital time at the start of the pandemic as the labs literally were made from scratch. And when I say made from scratch, I mean it was a blank room, and and people in charge of these lighthouse labs had to purchase, well, they had to borrow equipment from universities, they had to buy reagents, they had to buy even hoods to house the machines in that we do to do the testing in, So I've just felt we lost months and months just by going through this route. It just seemed to be instantly, oh, we'll farm it out to Delight, they'll sort it, when I don't understand why that was. I think the people running the Lighthouse Labs are extremely talented and hardworking and dedicated, and the job they've done to get us from 0 tests to now, 200,000 tests, probably more a day, is incredible. But it's not them that I'm worried about. It's the people higher up in government who are making the decisions. That's what I'm worried about, really. And I think if we want, as I said, we can still improve. And I think the way we can improve is, we need to get to a point where community asymptomatic tests can be performed everywhere in the UK, regardless of the tier we're in. So, Matt Hancock is telling us, don't get a test unless you have symptoms. Well, we know this is a virus that spreads when you don't have symptoms. So it's literally, it's not redundant, but, we're only catching the people who are symptomatic. Places like South Korea and other places have effective testing centers because they can test everyone. I could have the virus now, even though I've got no symptoms, and I'm coming into work every day, and me and loads of other people. You only need one person to get this virus and spreads. If you can identify the people who are asymptomatic, who have the virus, you can then allow them to isolate, and then the virus doesn't spread. It's as simple as that. It requires a lot of money and a lot of time, but I think that's what we should aspire to and are aspiring to reach by the end of the pandemic, hopefully.
Yeah, you mentioned South Korea there. They went a step further. I remember seeing some things online. In fact, if you entered the country, they give you 14 days worth of food and water to make sure that you stay in there, to reduce that potential contact and going outside. I remember at the time wanting to get a test, and I remember it being when the testing first came out, and I remember it being a couple of months ago as well, and wanting to get a test, and you have to tick 2 out of the 3 boxes of symptoms in order for them to kind of guarantee you a test. Now, the way that you highlighted there, it's easy to be asymptomatic and then still pass it off. What do you think was the stringent reason by not allowing everyone to have a test? Is it just purely a supply issue, or was there anything else behind it?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's just literally at the moment a supply issue of I don't even think it's the ability to test. I think, we could test everybody. We wouldn't be able to get this 24-hour golden turnaround that we do now, but I think it would be possible. I think it's more just, one, the amount of money it would cost. 2, I don't think, as we saw, the actual sites, not that perform the diagnostic tests, the sites that took the swabs from people, we just don't have enough capacity to be able to test everyone. Well, even everyone that wants a test, never mind everyone just in the country. And as you can see now, we've started to do some community asymptomatic testing in Liverpool, and they're trying to spread it to tier 3, other tier 3 areas. But in Liverpool, they had to draft the army in, to do this. Whereas I think I saw on the news, there's another area nearby Liverpool that's not being given any help at all, and they're just expected to be able to do community-wide testing, and it's just not feasible. So, it would just require a lot more money, a lot more manpower, and probably, a lot more space, probably more space than we currently have.
Yeah, and it's proven to work in that community-wide testing in Liverpool. We look at before the tier restrictions, Liverpool had the worst rate in the country. Now they're going into the new tier restrictions, and it's now tier 2. So that community-wide testing, I guess it seems pretty obvious that it was going to work anyways. And it's just the fact of removing the barriers for people to go on to have tests. I'm quite fortunate in the fact where I work, there's a testing centre on site, but not every workplace as well. If you think about smaller businesses, maybe medium organisations can facilitate that. And this thing, I imagine there's quite a few people that have not already had tests. So kind of moving on from the aspect of government and lockdown policies, I'd like to move on to actually talk about the virus itself to get a bit of a clearer understanding, because I guess the lockdown policies and all, it's the ones that the news likes to talk about the most. But I don't feel like we've heard as much about how this virus works, really. Can you give us a brief description of how it spreads and how it affects the body?
Yeah. So, I think that's a good point, really. So, again, because it's just a common misconception, it's just a cold and it affects old people. And I think that's not, it's plainly not true. So, the virus is a respiratory virus, so it's spread. It's basically, for better one of word, it colonizes, lives in the nasal area and in the lungs. So it's spread through particles in the air when you sneeze or speak. So that's why we have this important social distancing rule. And then there's also some data is now confirmed that it can potentially spread through fecal oral contamination as well, and maybe urine as well. So that's why, if you go to the toilet, if you cough, or if you touch any surface, that's why you need to wash your hands, because it's a very hardy virus. It can live on surfaces for a long time. So that's why you need to wash your hands with antiviral. So so normal people, I say normal people, the majority of people get common cold-like features, so that's why I think it's spreading. Obviously, the misnomer of just it being a common cold is spreading because even though there's a very large amount of people that have died, I think it's over 50,000 now, which is in the UK, which is horrific. A lot of people don't watch the news and they just see, my friend had it, he was fine. There's not many people I think have come into direct contact with the catastrophic effects it can have. A small percentage of the people get respiratory failure, and this is just due to systemic inflammation of the lungs. So basically, so much virus colonizes your lungs just can't cope with it, and it just gives out, and you have respiratory failure. That's obviously the main reason why we are in this lockdown. That it happens infrequently, but frequently enough that it's overwhelming our NHS and it's causing mass deaths in the UK. But we're also, as I mentioned before, we have it's becoming clear that long COVID is also important here. So this can be from things such as just fatigue, joint pain, chest pain, and these can occur months and months after infection, to potentially depression, and even serious things such as ongoing inflammation of the heart, and even lung function abnormalities. I've seen things of athletes that are unable to run or even jog now because of COVID. I think it's just important to state it's not just a cold, and it doesn't just affect old people. There's been cases shown that on the news of extremely healthy people under the age of 30 that can have very serious effects from the disease.
Yeah, I kind of so one thing I kind of want to expand upon is how it causes the long-term implications of certain areas of the body. And the first area which I'd like to discuss, we touched upon it there, was the lungs. So how does it actually cause long-term damage to the lungs?
Yeah, so I'm trying to think of an easy way to explain this. So basically when your body is infected with a virus, we have ways to detect this. We have certain receptors, and once they detect the virus, they then have to signal to the body that we're infected with this virus and we need to deal with it. And that's basically what inflammation is. So inflammation is a tool that the body uses to resolve infection by sending white blood cells and other things to deal with the virus. But that inflammation can become chronic and can just basically keep occurring, and you just get long-term inflammation of the lungs even when the virus isn't present anymore. And it basically just causes the breakdown of viral tissue of the tissue in our lungs. It will reduce it will stop our lung function from just we won't be able to breathe properly, basically, just because our lungs can't deal with the amount of viral stimulation that it's getting, and it just deals with that, and it can't have any other it can't deal with any other infections. It can't deal with any normal pollution or bacteria that you come into contact with. And just this mass inflammation is just not good for the lungs, and eventually they unfortunately give up.
Well, that's obviously that's long-term damages with it. What about the brain then? You mentioned earlier the heart, but one thing I'd like to focus is on the brain, because I don't think many people, you mentioned depression, but can it do any other forms of long-lasting damage on the brain?
I mean, I'm not, like I said, I'm not a coronavirus expert. I don't think so. Basically, viruses are very specific for what part of the body they can infect and live in. And there is the lungs and the nasal cavity. Then, like I said, though, the effects can spread to other areas of the body. And we know that coronavirus, there's circumstantial evidence that coronavirus, yes, can cause depression. We don't currently know why that is. It's obviously, it's not just a non-consequential effect of, oh, I'm ill, I'm depressed. It doesn't work like that. There is something happening in the body that is affecting the way our brains work upon infection of coronavirus. But yeah, we don't know why that is. I don't think it has any long-term effects in any other way, other types of brain disease. But that's not to say that it's a completely new disease virus, and we don't know yet what happens at all in the body, and we're learning new things every day.
Yeah. Why does it affect us differently then? Obviously, remove the aspect of age. Let's say, okay, we're both relatively young. We both could get it, and then I could have it really severely, like you said, with some athletes could have it and be able to shake it off. Some athletes could have it and, like you said, not be able to jog again. Why does it affect people who might be the same very differently?
Yeah, that's a very good point, and I'm going to feel like I'm saying this a lot. We don't actually know 100% at the moment. Obviously, it's a very new virus, but the way our body responds to each virus is important, each type of virus, and it has to respond in a very nuanced and controlled way. And if there's any change in this, then it can have disastrous consequences. People just vary due to genetics in certain types of, for example, proteins, or their immune system will differ slightly due to these genetics and some external factors. And this can just have a disastrous effect. So, for example, we know that gender is an issue here. So it seems like males are more likely to die than females are from coronavirus. There's a lot of reasons why that could be. There's some suggestions that male, the higher proportion of smokers, which can mean your lungs are already damaged prior to infection. Believe it or not, some studies have shown that males are likely to be less hygienic. and they're less likely to comply with hand washing.
We've all
So
got
this
some
can
male toilets. I don't think that's something that we might think. We know that for a definite.
and this less hygiene and being less hygienic can lead to basically other infections. So you are much more likely to die from coronavirus if you're already infected with flu. So if you have this co-infection at the same time, it can be disastrous. But yeah, one basic. So they are likely to have little effects and tip the balance in the favor of why men are more likely to die. But again, this is why I want to bring it up. It's because of the genetics, and this is one genetic. So this one genetic determinant that we know. So basically, to say briefly, women have two X chromosomes per cell, whereas men have one. We have an X and a Y, and a number of critical immune genes are located on the X chromosome. And one of the ways we detect viruses is through a certain receptor, and this is expressed at the X chromosome. So we think that although this shouldn't be the case, it's kind of circumvented where women have a greater expression of this protein, so therefore more likely to be able to detect the virus and have an appropriate immune response to it. So bringing it back to the original question, there's likely to be other small things such as this as to why it may affect you worse than it would me, but we just need to tease out those issues.
Yeah, I've heard about the double X chromosome being a cause factor of why men die more from coronavirus. But you said something important then, is the fact that it allows that double X chromosome allows women's bodies to identify the virus early on and then build an appropriate response. Because from the data that I found, that pretty much men in every category will die, are more likely to die, age category are likely to die from the coronavirus. However, from the ages of up until about 60, women are more likely to get the coronavirus. So is that the aspect of that double X chromosome working and identifying the virus and then combating it early on?
Yeah, the X chromosome is a strange thing as well. So basically, usually the gene is expressed on both chromosomes, but one of these genes is silenced. So you would only produce the same amount as a man would, because this is quote unquote the perfect amount that we should have. Whereas with these receptors that detect virus, it seems that somehow this isn't silenced, and yeah, it's expressed more in females. Something really interesting, something that I want to investigate more and look at more, because yeah, it's really fascinating and it seems to be having a beneficial effect.
Yeah. One thing I'd also like to discuss is the aspect of the mutation of the virus. What we've noticed, we're in the second wave now. When I was doing a bit of history and looking into the aspect of the Spanish flu, that had four waves. Now, the Spanish flu was also aligned with, it was at the same time as the First World War. So it wasn't actually the priority of the world at the time. And obviously, this was talking about when there was trench warfare as well. So a lot more of it spread. If we still carry on in the UK and with the world with the aspects of the policies that we are taking, could you see this coronavirus having 4 or more waves?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, we say we're in the second wave now. If I was being devil's advocate, I'd say, can we have a second wave if the first wave ever really went away? I mean, we got cases down relatively low, but I don't think we had it down enough to be able to say this is a second wave. Is really, it's important to say that we're having the second wave, if we're calling it a second wave, not due to the COVID mutating. Really, it's more just we've not been able to eradicate it. So I think I'll be surprised if we get the second wave down low enough to be able again until a vaccine comes. We're all just hoping that a vaccine's coming now. That seems to be everyone's way of coping with it. Just stay inside and hope that the vaccine will come soon and hope it will help reduce it. The A vaccine won't be the end all, be all and end all, though. It will definitely reduce rates in coronavirus. Hopefully, if we get a high enough uptake of the vaccine, um, and that will allow us to live hopefully relatively normally go back to normal again. There will be some changes we'll have to make, and I don't think the vaccine will eradicate coronavirus. So we will get waves again spread through the population, especially those that are unvaccinated. Whether this occurs seasonally, or it could occur every couple of years, maybe, or even further apart from that, I think it will still be in the population. And an important thing to say is that we don't know yet whether the coronavirus will mutate again. So we have to have vaccines to the flu every year because it's a new different type of flu that predominates in that certain year. So this is because we have different serotypes of the virus, and this means that it's slightly different, and that means that a vaccine that is developed for a certain serotype won't be effective on another serotype.
Mm-hmm.
This is because in the past the virus has mutated to form this new serotype, and now we have multiple serotypes of this virus in the population. So we're hopeful that if the coronavirus does mutate, which it may be doing already if you trust the data that's shown that it's now able to infect minks in Denmark, which it was thought not to have been able to do previously, that may definitely render the vaccine useless or maybe not as effective. We just don't know. The people creating these vaccines are very, very clever. Obviously, the best minds in the world are on this, and they are creating vaccines that are less likely to be affected if the vaccine does mutate, because we know if the virus does mutate, what parts are likely to mutate, and if we can target the vaccines at other areas, then it's likely to be effective.
So
but we don't know.
In the aspect of you were talking about, there's 2 points that I kind of want to expand upon here. The first one is keeping on this line of the aspect of creating a new vaccine. If you are having to create a new vaccine to essentially because it's a mutation, do we keep the same basic structure of the original vaccine and then try a few different things and to try and expand on the original structure, or is it a process of having to try something completely new?
Yeah, it should be this has obviously been an extremely quick process anyway, creating it in a year. But yeah, I would assume and think it would be a much quicker vaccine production cycle for a new serotype. If that does occur, it's likely to only be a slight change. But I'm hopeful. I mentioned about the mutation because I don't want to get everyone's hopes up that who's listening to this, that I saw all over social media with my friends and family as soon as the coronavirus vaccine was announced on BBC. They were planning when they were weddings and holidays, and it's not that simple. But I'm hopeful that these vaccines that we produce will be effective enough that we shouldn't have to create new vaccines continually. But it's just to be aware that that's something that could occur.
Yeah. And one thing I want to kind of ask you again and expand upon is you was quite hesitant to confirm that we're in the second wave there. Do you honestly believe that we're still in a first wave?
I suppose I was just being a bit cheeky there, maybe having a dig at the government. But yeah, we did when we locked down. We got the virus levels down extremely low, but probably and then we need to restart the economy. So we came out of lockdown, and then cases. I think people then thought it was over. Basically, cases, it took a while to increase, but they did increase, and I think that's because people kind of let the guard down and thought it was over. And yeah, we have a new wave. Probably we do have a second wave, and it's obviously much higher than the first wave. And that would be without a vaccine or without changes, then yeah, that will keep happening
Yeah,
for
well,
sure.
McDonald's was half price and everything else was half price, so no one was going to stay indoors. Um, One thing that obviously, now this is kind of, we mentioned earlier about how people are kind of reading the situation based on their personal situation. And to me, in the aspect of, I've kind of got something similar with this. When I was doing some research on the Spanish flu, it was very common in the first wave that there was a lot of people who just had very minimal symptoms, like colds, coughs, bit of a fever, and it infected a small amount of people in the first wave. And then in the second wave, that's when it did the most damage, and a lot more people got it. Now, this is coming from basic personal experience, not backing this up with any kind of scientific data from what I've read and research. The first wave that I saw, I didn't really know anyone that had the virus. And then I've not compared the death rates compared to the first lockdown and now, but now in the second wave, I know at least 10 people. I know two people that have had to go into hospital. So that's where the correlation kind of aligns with me, that I believe that we're in the second wave. But obviously you've got scientists like yourself, and it's important to kind of get that full objective back in, because when you're emotionally connected to something, it can obviously deter your view.
Yeah, I mean, so I think it's difficult because to compare between, if we're saying the first wave and the second wave, it is difficult to compare between the two as well, just because we know so much more now. So, people will have got the disease and died, maybe not in the UK, but in other countries, and not known they've had coronavirus. It will have been attributed to influenza or other diseases. So that skews the data straight away there. Then the fact, that our testing has got so much better. A lot of people could have been infected with the disease, and you hear a lot of people saying, "Oh, maybe I thought I did have the disease," but it wasn't confirmed. Because we didn't have the testing capacity to do that. Whereas now, we are able to confirm tests a lot quicker. A lot of people can be tested. So yeah, I think it's not even scientifically really where we're seeing these differences. I think it's just policy, and we're just learning more and more each day, and our testing centres are getting better and better, that we can distinguish between the two waves, and that may create some sort of disparity that it's hard to pick out really. But there is also data that shows that if you are infected with COVID for a second time, the symptoms can be much worse, and we don't know why that is currently. So again, if you was infected in the first wave and didn't know you was, and then you come into contact with it again during the second wave, and it's confirmed you have coronavirus, that could be the second time you've been infected, whereas you're only aware of it being the first time. That's why we may be seeing some more severe symptoms than we did during the first wave.
Right. Okay, that's quite interesting, to be fair. So in regards to the vaccine, obviously AstraZeneca have made a breakthrough. Pfizer have made a breakthrough. I think AstraZeneca's one is 70% effective from what what the research is showing. How long can we wait till we actually see this put to the market? Obviously, it's going to be directed to the vulnerable, as the same way as flu jabs are around winter time. But how long? Surely it's soon now, because well done to the whole scientific industry for fast tracking this process of finding a vaccine in under a year. It's practically unheard of. But like you said, people are itching, waiting for this vaccine to come. When do you expect it to kind of be released for the first time?
Yeah, so it is incredible. I think you've made that point, that the UK are planning for a December rollout for the Pfizer vaccine, and then I would suggest that the other vaccines, such as the Moderna and the Oxford AstraZeneca ones, would probably come early next year. And yeah, it's incredible. The aim was always to get it by the end of 2020. and I genuinely didn't think it was possible. To be honest, I thought it would be way into 2021, but the hard work and dedication all these scientists that are involved have put into it has been incredible. And I think now is, I think it's pretty much guaranteed that we will have a safe and effective vaccine. Well, not just one. You know, it looks like we're going to have 4 or 5, 6 or 7 effective vaccines. It's now, unfortunately, a political, a manufacturing, a economic, distribution issue. You know, before, so you know, we need to get this vaccine now to the people that need it the most as quick as possible. But that's costs a lot of money, and it's going to take a lot of time to mass produce all these vaccines. Um, so just because the vaccine's on its way doesn't mean that, you know, the pandemic is over. There's still a lot of hurdles to jump. For example, I think we've secured quite a lot, or we've secured a large amount of the Pfizer vaccine. So hopefully we can use that, and we also have secured a large amount of the Oxford vaccine. But the Moderna vaccine, which is potentially easier to store and use than the Pfizer vaccine, we won't have access to that till the spring due to certain political decisions. So yeah, it's that I want to point out that, you know, it's not going to be solved instantly. This first rollout, I think we might have 10,000 vaccines, maybe. You know, that's not going to be enough to change significant. It's going to be enough to impact people's lives considerably. You know, the people who are most at risk will be a lot safer. But I don't think it's going to change the way society will act as a whole until much later next year.
Yeah. So what are the, just to kind of highlight that, what are the political decisions that are preventing us from using the Moderna vaccine? Because I've not really heard about anything like that.
Okay, so I think it's the Moderna vaccine. If I'm incorrect, I apologise. But there's definitely one vaccine. So basically, the UK, there is an EU initiative which basically collaborates on vaccine development, and once a vaccine is created, distribution. So we basically did not get involved with that in the UK because we wanted to do it on our own. And we put a lot of money and time into the Oxford vaccine. So, you know, you have to basically, every country has pre-purchased a set amount of certain vaccines. And we put basically most of our eggs in the Oxford basket, which I think scientifically is probably, I mean, a good idea. I think it will be effective, and it will work well. But by pulling out of this EU initiative, there's one vaccine that we could definitely have had earlier, but now we have to wait until the spring to get it because the EU countries have priority for the distribution. We managed to again secure some of the Pfizer vaccine, but that the majority of that will be going to the USA first because it's an American company. So yeah, there's just issues like that. I think a lot, you know, people have gambled in the quote unquote on which vaccine they think they would be able to get, either for the cheapest or which would be able to get the quickest. And it seems like maybe we'll be slightly behind the curve with some countries, although the government won't want to admit that.
Yeah. So why is it that the AstraZeneca vaccine will be taking a bit longer to distribute, essentially? Because obviously, like you mentioned there, that we heavily invested in making the Oxford AstraZeneca one, and we're rolling out the Pfizer one. Why is it taking a little bit longer for the AstraZeneca one to be released?
I think it's just the way it's worked. You know, it's important to point out that one of the main things I've seen from anti-vaxxers and things like this is, oh, this vaccine has been produced so quickly, it must be unsafe. You know, I don't want to get it, and this is taking slightly longer because every vaccine that's being produced has to pass stringent safety tests. One, it has to be proved to be effective. Two, it has to be safe. So none of these companies are skipping that, and it's just taking a bit longer for the Oxford and AstraZeneca to be basically verified as being we have to be 100% sure that it's safe and effective. And just as the way people work at different speeds, it's the way it's just occurred that this Pfizer vaccine has been announced first and can potentially be um, produced first, but it still needs to go through a lot of regulations and from regulatory bodies in the UK before it can be distributed.
Yeah. So I kind of want to move on a little bit to the aspect of people taking this vaccine. From what I read in The Economist, the figure that was batted around was that generally 70% of the population need to take the vaccine in order for it to be effective. Is that true?
So, obviously, we don't really have an idea for coronavirus, for SARS-CoV-2. I think 70% is quite low. If you look at the MMR vaccine, for example, you need around 95% take up of the vaccine to basically eradicate measles. Measles, as we have the anti-vax rhetoric in the UK, our vaccination rates are lowering, and measles has started to emerge again in this country as our take up of the vaccine has dropped to around 90%. Obviously, this is virus specific, and I've not read that article, but I would imagine 70% would potentially be enough, to allow us to live relatively normally again. However, if we want to really get rid of this virus and make sure it doesn't return, we need a near 100% take up if possible. Although that seems to not be possible at this time due to anti-vax rhetoric. But yeah, basically we want it to be as high as possible.
Do you think we can get that 70% if that is the number?
I mean, I honestly, it's tough. It's really tough. I think we will definitely get. I would like to think we could get to 70%, but you do see so much misinformation and other issues that will definitely reduce that number. I don't think we'll get anywhere near 95% or 90%. Now I'm asking for. It depends which way the government goes as well. People's hands may be forced. I've heard rumours. Well, it's been in the news. That the government you may need an identification card basically to show that you've been vaccinated if you want to go into a football stadium or if you want to go to a gig or something like that. So that may push it up. But I think if it was just left to the people to decide, I'd be very surprised if we got in the 80s or 90s. And I think that's extremely disappointing at the moment.
Yeah, it is disappointing. And I think you're right in that aspect. Maybe there does need to be an incentive there for people to I guess, the aspect is incentivize people to get this vaccine. I think it's hard to kind of judge the picture of how many people will are against getting the vaccine, because what we see with a lot of these issues like this, it's similar to the aspects of the flat earthers. Like sometimes a very small minority, but that have a big voice, and sometimes it's the most dangerous thing that small minority with the big voice can do is make a bigger population have some doubts. They may not fully believe in everything, but that instance of doubt is the aspect that have what can cause a snowball effect, which is the dangerous thing. But what I find quite fascinating is the sudden distrust of people, like from the anti-vaxxers group, of science. Why do you think this has been on the rise? Because it sounds illogical. Like the pure aspect of science is complete objectivity, and it seems like it's suffered as a result of the political elite.
Yeah, I think this is a very important question, and I mean this is why I'm doing this podcast. So obviously I like to talk about science, so I would have enjoyed this conversation with you regardless. But I think it's I feel like I have an obligation as a scientist to be able to get this message out and get accurate information out to people to be able to decide for themselves. I think there's a number of issues. Firstly, I think, as you mentioned, there's there's a rise of people prominent in politics, such as Donald Trump and Nigel Farage, and these people have no scientific backgrounds, but profess themselves to be knowledgeable. And this begins to give people a warped sense of science. When you have Donald Trump, who is technically one of the most important people in the world, the most powerful leader in the world, saying that he can't catch coronavirus again because he's already had it, that's scientifically incorrect, and people will just believe him. So it's hard. It's extremely hard to combat this. I think people also distrust Boris Johnson, for example. I don't like Boris Johnson. I'm just going to put it out there. But when he tells people to take a vaccine, people will instantly just distrust him and not want to do that. And I think the main issue is that's when people turn to social media, which is rife with scientific inaccuracies portrayed as fact, and people take them as gospel. And I'm not saying you should believe everything Boris and experts say blindly. You should be curious enough to do your own research, and you should be curious enough to think about and investigate the vaccine, because it's going to go into your body. You should do that research, but it's imperative that the research you do is good and you use good, accurate sources. The amount of people I've seen just take Facebook videos as fact when they're riddled with inaccuracies is just, it's crazy, really. These just conspiracy theories are rife, and it's very hard to combat that. I do think that us in scientists have to be better at disseminating this information to the general public. It's a very complicated subject, but I think the way scientists try to get the points across usually, and especially during these government talks, has been complicated. It's been long. The way we produce our scientific information is in journals, and they're behind paywalls that people outside of science can't read, even if they are interested in reading. So I think there's something we need to think about importantly, and think about how we get our points across better. We shouldn't just ridicule anti-vaxxers. We should want to engage with them and tell them why they're wrong. And it's not wrong to be able to question science, but I think people need to have the accurate facts be portrayed to them in a way that it can be digested and understood easily.
Yeah, you make a really good point there of not in the aspect of mocking them. I think the skepticalness, you've got to remember that the big thing that these anti-vaxxers saying is don't be sheep, as in just follow straight everything. The argument they are saying is essentially to allow them to and teach them why this is so important. It's a very difficult barrier to break down, and as I referenced earlier, I think because scientists generally has such a big influence in the aspect of with the pandemic and in governments in making decisions, it gets wrongfully categorized with them as the reputation tarnished. And I've just kind of had a thought then in the aspect of right now it seems like there's no big famous scientist, that everyone could just. The last one that I could probably say was Stephen Hawking. We've had people throughout history. You talk about Einstein, you talk about these big famous figures that because of their knowledge and because of their expertise, if they put their weight behind this, then maybe the public could be like, right, okay, that's it. It's great that people like that you are doing it, and I admire you very much for kind of coming on here and trying to spread this message. But obviously, maybe that's one of the key figures is that there's no one reputable from the scientific community that has that big reputation and trusting reputation that people can separate from the government.
Yeah, I agree. If we had someone like the David Attenborough of infectious diseases, I think that would go a long way. I don't envy the scientists that are currently working closely with the government. They have a job and they do a very important job. I think they are hamstrung in many ways, and it allows them to not do their job effectively. as they could, or they are doing the job very well, but they can't get their points across very good. Even I've watched some of the press conferences from Boris where he's presenting the data, and I should be interested in them, and it's just boring me to tears the way they're presenting it and the way they're they're doing it. It's being mocked on by other scientists. There does need to be a much better way that we can communicate these things to the general public, for sure.
Mm. Do you have any ideas on how that could be done, or?
No, you probably. I mean, we have the field of science communication. Is a real job. It's a real field, and these people have their job is to take the complicated information created by research and then giving this to the general public in easy and digestible bites. But that these types of people aren't being used by the government currently. That's clear. These long talks of slides with 1,000 graphs on are not doing it. And so I think we should definitely turn to more science communication people and maybe put them in charge of certain things. And even just, for example, so I work for the university, and the head of the testing labs, the Lighthouse Labs, did a talk via Zoom to anyone who wanted to listen from the university, and they spoke to everyone about how the testing process works from start to finish. It was extremely interesting, but it also, he told you certain things like where there's bottlenecks or why it's important. You have to act in certain ways and why certain issues were occurring. And I just thought, I know this because I worked there, and I also know some of these other things that he's talking about because I'm a scientist. But I know, for example, my mum would be really interested in this, or my friend who's not a scientist would be really interested in this, and it's currently not being broadcast to any people like that. So I just think we need to really, think about how we communicate as a whole, really.
Could there be a way of so obviously making journals free, but also modifying journals so that they're more suitable for readers and make them a 10-minute read, and obviously modify the wording to an extent so that I know that's probably the reputation of some science magazines, but it's still not getting out there. Maybe universities could take on that kind of role.
Yeah, I mean, there's companies that do this already, but they simplify papers, they present it in easy to digest formats. But that information then kind of goes to shareholders of pharmaceutical people or things like that. It doesn't find its way to the general public. And obviously it's done for profit. The way we probably need some not-for-profit businesses that could do this, but I think it would be very useful, and there probably are not-for-profit businesses that do a good job of doing this, but it's not widespread enough to have a real impact, I think, currently.
Yeah. Well, more scientists on podcasts would be probably a better format.
Sure.
A couple more questions and then I'll let you go off. Thank you for staying on so late. These are questions that I've asked for audience listeners. Some of them are from different, there's a couple and there's from different backgrounds. The first one which I've had, which I think it makes sense if you're not fully attached, essentially to understand how the virus works, but a simple one that I've heard a lot is that why don't the government just isolate all the vulnerable and old people and let the rest of us live normally and kind of spread? We kind of touched this earlier with the aspect of herd immunity. So if a lot of us are going around and spreading it and keeping the vulnerable isolated, you could use all the money that we spent from furlough to kind of ensure they are isolated well. Why has this not been done? Would this have been an effective strategy?
Yeah, so I mean, I think what we spoke about hopefully would have answered that question now that, herd immunity is not feasible. Even if they tried it, it wouldn't have worked because of solely how the virus works. Now we know that there's not enough antibodies generated in the population to give herd immunity, but it also would be disastrous. And I just want to say, would you like it if you was vulnerable and you was forced to stay in the house? in your home while everyone else was off doing what they wanted to do. Yeah, I just don't think it was feasible, and never mind the effects of long COVID. So even if it was spread through the population, we'd still have all these issues that we're having now. I think the NHS would have been overwhelmed. So yeah, I just don't think it was feasible really. Good point about furlough again. I don't agree. I agree that I don't think lockdown is an effective strategy really. To contain to have a functioning country. We needed the lockdown first time around to curb the virus as it was new, but then we should have, been able to at least devise plans to effectively cope with the virus without lockdown, and then that might have had an impact on the economic issues of furlough and other things like that.
What type of plans would that be? I know the simple one, half-price food, but
yeah. I mean, it's really tough, and it's not just the government. I've bashed the government very badly here. So hopefully, I never have to apply for a job in the government. I don't know how that will go now, but it depends on everyone. You need compliance from the whole country, and I don't think we're getting that at the moment. Taiwan are the closest country to China, and they have hardly any cases because it's been shown they have 100% compliance of mask wearing at all times, even on the streets, and they have a good test and trace system. We obviously don't have a large compliance of mask usage, I don't think really. I'd hate to see the data on that, if there was any out there. And, our test and trace isn't good enough to be able to do it currently. So, yeah, it's tough.
The mask compliance is a funny one. I've had a few friends that went on holiday in the summer, and they went on holiday and there was like, oh, we went to Greece and Spain. Well, when we went over there, we had to wear masks and we could only take them off when we was eating. And if I had a sip of a pint, I could only take it to actually have a drink rather than leave it off. Had to wear them in the streets. And obviously it does sound pretty extreme to us in the UK, but the following question asked that was, did you feel safer? And the answer to every single one of them was yes. And these are people, some people just had bothered wearing masks, or some people are a bit skeptical about it. And it just shows the logic there. As part of its, I don't know if it's this self-righteousness of our rights or the aspect of distrust. But like you said, that non-compliance is ultimately impacting us even further. One of the questions I wouldn't mind asking as well is, if we're talking about in relation to both private and public healthcare in all sectors, all businesses, who benefits and who loses in regards to COVID?
I mean, I think it's quite, I'm obviously not an economist, but I think I know, and it's quite a depressing answer really, but I mean, the ones who will lose out are the general population. We're going into a large recession. We're already in a very, very large recession. It's going to get worse and worse, especially if you combine it with Brexit. We're going to have increased taxation. We've got mass unemployment that will rocket up once the furlough scheme tapers off as well. It's not great at all. They're the ones that lose out. I hope that the NHS doesn't lose out because of it. I can see in the future it being the way we've obviously dealt with this is pretty bad. And I don't think it's the NHS's fault, but I can see them taking the fall in the future from politicians. They've chucked Public Health England under the bus straight away before they even had a chance to do anything with it. And I feel like they might do the same with the NHS. And I think it's clear that obviously pharmaceutical companies are benefiting. Whether that's, people see pharmaceutical companies as the enemy, but I mean, they're needed. Without this, we wouldn't have been able to produce this vaccine within under a year. AstraZeneca have guaranteed that they won't profit from the vaccine when distributing to low economically developed countries, such as countries in Africa and Asia, but they obviously will benefit from it when they're selling it to the UK and USA for a lot of money overall. Um, but obviously, the mass profiteering seems to come from the private companies that are involved, like Serco in the test and trace system, Deloitte that are involved in the testing system. Um, yeah, basically, all private businesses that with strong ties to the government seem to be the only things doing well at the moment.
Yeah, it's
I'll
quite
let you work
crazy.
out why that is.
It's quite crazy the fact that they'll make a profit on selling it to the UK, despite the UK funding AstraZeneca so much in part to get this vaccine. One thing that I think I disagree with you in the aspect of the NHS being thrown under the bus. I think the NHS is the political gold card that every politician uses. Protect our NHS, or Labour use it to the aspect of attack the Tories that they're going to privatise the NHS. It's the trump card essentially, and I think if any politician was going to try to attack the NHS, I think it would be political suicide. The way I think potentially where the NHS is going to take the most heat from this is the actual people within the NHS. We hear so much about nurses and doctors being overworked. I think once we get out of this, there's going to be people just pursuing either different careers, people put off of becoming a nurse or a doctor, the aspects we can't recruit these doctors and nurses from abroad as an impact of Brexit. I think that's going to be the ultimate tipping point of which made it decide whatever future the NHS will have in the future. That's what I probably am the most concerned about in regards to it.
Yeah, you make a good point there. Yeah, I agree with most of the things you said there. And yeah, I'd like to take this time to say thank you to everyone in the NHS. Basically, the jobs that they've done is incredible, and I couldn't imagine what it was like to be a doctor or a nurse currently, or even just a hospital worker in any shape or form. It's incredible what they've been doing, and yeah, hopefully they can continue to cope and do as good a job as they've been doing.
I'd like to support that as well. Thank you for obviously all key workers. It's just incredible job that they've been doing. They deserve a lot more than a few claps on the street on a Thursday. Okay, the final question that I won't mind to asking is, I ask this to everyone. If you could give any advice to anyone, it can be about anything you particularly want to, what would it be?
That's a good question. Okay, so I think the main thing I'd like to say is basically just to do your research. We're not a country that forces people to take vaccinations. I'm sure some other countries will do that. As a virologist, it would be no surprise for me to say that I think you should take the vaccine. And if you have any issues why you think you should not take that, there is plenty of information from reputable sources that will tell you why you should take the vaccine and why it is very safe to do so. And if you can't find the information and you want to find that information, contact people. I'll put my Twitter handle in this in the notes to this, and people can contact me. Even there's a number of scientists and other type of healthcare professionals that would be glad to be able to speak to you and tell you why you should take this vaccine.
What I'll do with this is, what we can do, Jake, is when I publish this, you can give me a Twitter handle, and also you can send over some sites that I will post with the podcast when I release it on social media, of avenues where people can go out and find more.
I think it's a great idea. Yeah.
So we can do that. We want to spread the aspect of, people not only essentially to be safe, whatever your views are of vaccines. We're here to. What we want to do is spread the message of the fact that we want people to be safe and we all want to get out of this together. So that's what this podcast was for, to not only from your side to get your point of view, but I felt I had a responsibility to use this platform to try and promote the correct message amongst a lot of the misinformation that was going out there. But thank you for coming on, Jake. It's been fantastic having you.
No problem. That's great. It was great to speak to you, and thanks for the opportunity.
Thanks for listening, guys. If you enjoyed it, give it a like or a 5-star rating, depending on what platform you're using. If you want to find out more content from HP Talks, subscribe to the channel. From here, you'll be able to see all the content I released for season 1. If you want to support the channel even further, head over to my Patreon at HP Talks. I'll put a link for that down below. Cheers, guys.